The U.S. and Iran, it's one of the most charged geopolitical dramas of our time, right? It's a messy story of mistrust, shadow wars, and nuclear brinkmanship. So what's really driving this? What keeps the conflict going? In this explainer, we're going to unpack the core pillars that fuel this decades-long entanglement. Let's dig in. Okay, to get a handle on this, let's actually jump forward a bit to a hypothetical near future. Imagine a 12-day war with Israel just ended in June 2025. Right after, an Iranian lawmaker says this. And it's a shockingly honest admission. It just pulls back the curtain on a huge vulnerability hiding behind all the military bluster. A really fragile economy. This statement perfectly captures the tension at the heart of Iran's entire strategy. So that's the big question, isn't it? How did we get here? How did a relationship that, believe it or not, once had the U.S. and Iran as allies completely fall apart into decades of hostility and conflict? Well, to answer that, we've got to break it down. All right. First things first. To understand anything about today's headlines, you gotta go back, way back. This deep-seated anger and mistrust, it wasn't a given. It was forged in a handful of key moments that just shattered the relationship on both sides. You know, it all came apart so fast. The relationship really started to go south when the U.S. helped create the Shah's secret police, Savak, which became known for its brutality. By 1979, the Iranian people saw the U.S.-backed Shah as an American puppet, and they overthrew him. Then Ayatollah Khomeini returns, and the country pivots hard into an Islamic republic. But the real breaking point, the point of no return, was the 444-day hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy. After that, diplomatic ties were cut, and the damage was done for generations. And here's the thing you have to remember. This isn't just dusty old history. These events became the origin stories for both countries. For Iran, it's a story of throwing off American control. For the U.S., it's a story of betrayal by a hostile new regime. And that ideological clash is the foundation for everything that follows. Okay, so that historical baggage, it's now playing out on a totally different battlefield, the economy. Instead of direct military conflict, the main weapons today are often financial. We're talking about economic warfare, and it's absolutely central to the U.S.-Iran struggle. And to really get a sense of Iran's economic weakness, you have to appreciate the trauma it's already been through. That brutal 8-year war with Iraq back in the 80s, it cost the country an estimated $500 billion. I mean, think about that. An economy doesn't just bounce back from something like that. It leaves deep scars and vulnerabilities that are still there today. Now, adding another layer of complexity to Iran's economy is this really unique thing called boneyards. These are basically huge, tax-free religious foundations that control a massive chunk of the country's wealth. And here's the kicker. They operate outside of normal financial rules. It creates this very opaque, complicated system that's all tangled up with the state and its religious leaders. And you can see this pattern even if we look at data from way back in 2003. Look at how much of the workforce was tied up in agriculture and state-run services. What this tells you is that the economy has this long-standing, built-in structural weakness. It makes the whole system really vulnerable to outside pressure, especially sanctions. Look, sanctions aren't just abstract policy. They have a real, devastating human cost. This quote from Iran's ambassador at the UN, it was about kids with a terrible genetic skin condition, sometimes called butterfly kids. Now, the sanctions don't officially target medicine, but they make financial transactions so complicated and risky that companies just stop selling critical medical supplies to Iran. It just puts a heartbreaking face on what economic warfare actually looks like on the ground. So this isn't just a two-player game. This whole conflict, this clash of history and economics, it spills out across the entire Middle East. It's like a giant, high-stakes chessboard, with nations from Lebanon to Yemen caught in the middle of a power struggle. And if you want a perfect example of how this works, just look at Iraq. The U.S. and Iranian goals there are polar opposites. The U.S. wants an independent Iraq, a security partner, but Iran works to keep Iraq in its orbit through deep economic ties and by backing powerful militias. It's a constant push and pull, leaving Iraq stuck trying to please two powerful bosses. So how does Iran project its power? Well, its main tool is what's called the axis of resistance. Now, this isn't a formal army. It's a network of proxy groups and partners that get money, training, and weapons from Iran. Through groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen, Iran can challenge its rivals, like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S., without a direct fight. It's a smart, asymmetric strategy that gives them influence far beyond their own borders. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and honestly, the most volatile one, The nuclear question. For decades, this has been the ultimate flashpoint. It's the one thing that constantly threatens to turn this long-running shadow war into an all-out direct military confrontation. The story of the nuclear deal has been a total roller coaster, right? First, you get the big landmark agreement in 2015, the JCPOA, and it feels like a major breakthrough. But then, just 3 years later, boom, the U.S. pulls out and slaps on a maximum pressure campaign. So what does Iran do? It starts ramping up its nuclear enrichment again. It's this destructive cycle of diplomacy, withdrawal, and escalation that makes the whole situation so incredibly tense and unstable. And what makes all of this even harder to solve is how divided things are right here in the United States. Just look at these numbers. You've got strong majorities of Democrats and independents who support a nuclear deal, but a majority of Republicans are against it. This partisan split means U.S. policy can just flip-flop every 4 or 8 years, making it almost impossible to have a consistent long-term strategy. So where does all this leave us? Well, when you take a step back and weave all these pieces together, the bitter history, the economic warfare, the regional power plays, and the nuclear threat, you start to get a really clear picture of why this conflict just feels so stuck. What you really have is a vicious cycle, right? The bad history fuels the proxy wars make the nuclear program seem more important, the nuclear program leads to crippling sanctions, and the sanctions just reinforce all that original mistrust. Each part feeds the others, locking both sides into this endless conflict. And that's the question we're left with, isn't it? When everything is so tangled together, when every pillar of the conflict props up the others, is there any way out? Is it even possible to break the cycle? Or are we just looking at a future of constant simmering conflict? That's the big unanswered question at the heart of it all.